And now to the business of the day. Without further ado, I call to the podium our Chair of the Day, past President Peter Rogers, to take over today's meeting. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, President Chris. It gives me extraordinary pleasure as a long-serving member at North Melbourne Football Club, going back to the matches of the 1970s when I used to take my girls down to Arden Street. And since then we've had enormous success. We've had 4 premierships. I feel we've had very good value, Sonia, from the club. I'm here today because Quinn Scalzo is in southern Italy and due back tonight. And I'd just like also to recognise the Scalzo family, who are so supportive of what Sonia does and of the club. And it's good to see you all here again today. Our speaker today, Sonia Hood, is the president of North Melbourne Football Club. She's also CEO of Community Hubs Australia, and she's a director of the Scanlon Foundation and formerly the board chair of the Macaulay Community Services for Women organisation. Sonia is going to talk to us about building bridges through empowering communities with the spirit of football. And without any further, I'd like to introduce Sonia Hood.
Now, to whoever asked the question up the back of the room, how are we going? The answer is not well. But we'll be going better sometime soon, and I'm happy to debate anybody on that. If you can't hear me, just wave from the back, but I'm going to assume that you can hear me unless someone tells me otherwise. It's a real honour to be here, so thanks Peter and thanks Chris for inviting me. Hello to any shin boners in the room, and hello Rotarians. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we meet on and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to note that those owners, along with traditional owners across Australia, have asked us as a nation to make an important decision for their and our future in the referendum to be held later this year. I'd like the debate on that referendum to be held with the same respect with which I make that acknowledgement. I would argue that the referendum is not about politics, despite the attempts of many to make it about that, but it's about basic humanity. Who are we as a country, and how are we able to recognise our past as we look to our future? I'm not going to talk about The Voice today. I think some of you will be relieved by that. I am going to talk about the 2 roles that I play. I'm going to try to do this in time to leave time for questions. I love questions, and I will answer just about anything you ask me, and I'm pretty bad at dodging questions, so that's the opportunity for you. It's a real honour to be asked to speak here today. My grandfather was a passionate Rotarian and was frequently involved in Rotary fundraisers and events, which for him notably were golf tournaments that became more elaborate every year. And I think my belief in the power of community to drive change started there, although sadly for him, not my interest in golf. I have, as many of you know, or as you now know, 2 roles, and I'm going to talk about both of them today. In my day job, I'm CEO of Community Hubs Australia, a national organisation based in primary schools in local communities across Australia. Community Hubs target women and preschool children from non-English speaking backgrounds, but we work with whole communities to drive connection and change. We've got 100 sites across the country, funded by 5 different governments, as well as philanthropy, and we work with about 10,000 families a year. I'll talk more on that in a minute. In my side gig, I'm president of the North Melbourne Football Club, and just in case you weren't completely sure on this, being president of a football club is an unpaid role, and that's true for all of them. I'm the club's first female president and the competition's 4th. All the other 3, Peggy O'Neill at Richmond, Kate Roffey at Melbourne and Kylie Watson-Wheeler at the Bulldogs, have seen their men's team play in grand finals, and 2 of them have won. I like to say I'm doing my bit for diversity by proving that women can run teams at the bottom of the ladder as well as the top. For what it's worth, and to our friend up the back there, I've got no interest in staying at the bottom of the ladder. My two roles and my two worlds might have a lot more in common than you might expect, and to some extent that's what I'm going to talk about today. And to explain that, I'm going to do something I don't normally do, and that's to talk a little bit about myself. I come from a small family. My dad is an only child. My mother had one sister. My parents divorced when I was 5, and my 2 sisters and I spent weekdays with my mother and most weekends with my father, and in turn with my grandparents. My grandfather's 2 main loves were Rotary and golf, and in fact for a long time I thought Rotary was a golf club, and I was really confused by the German exchange students who we would meet at the airport and who would appear at lunch every now and then. My grandmother loved the Melbourne Football Club and endured golf. My grandparents had struck an early marriage arrangement that she would learn to play golf if he barracked for Melbourne, a pact that saw them safely through 50 years of marriage. My father, an only child, hated golf, hated the Melbourne Football Club, never got involved in Rotary, and instead poured his energies into the team of his aunt, which was the North Melbourne Football Club. His aunt, my great aunt, was a football tragic whose worst moment in her life was losing her eldest son to Essendon, and who responded to that considerable setback, some would say betrayal, by ensuring that every one of her children and her sister's children and every one of the grandchildren would barrack for North. She was a force to be reckoned with, and that is how my connection with the North Melbourne Football Club was forged. Every weekend between March and August, or if we were lucky, September, was spent either at Arden Street, where we had reserved seats, wooden slats on metal poles, the Scalzos know what I'm talking about, or travelling to every away ground in the league, where my great aunt would have arrived when gates opened to ensure we had seats right on the fence. She went on the train, we drove in Dad's old Datsun, full of hope on the way there, listening to Harry Beitzel on the radio on the way back if we'd won, or classical music radio station if we hadn't. Dad hated pop music, and as a kid I used to wonder how many other people were being tortured like I was on the way home from a game. Now, I'm not telling you this because my family's special, but because so many of us have a story just like this when it comes to our football team. I suspect there are some of you in the room who don't have a team, and if that's the case, see me afterwards. I've got the perfect club for you. But I reckon everybody here can tell you a story of who they barrack for and why. And that in turn leads to shared experiences, whether it's the mud that used to pass for a centre square at Moorabbin, or the car park at Waverley, and the hours that we spent trying to find the car, or the long drive back from Geelong, and I can tell you that hasn't changed, or the hostility in the outer at Vic Park, where I learnt more about race relations in Australia than I ever learned at school. I'm seeing enough nods around the room to know that many of you know exactly what I'm talking about. We didn't grow up together, but we have shared experiences or common memories, and that in turn connects us even if we've never met. And I tell you one other thing, I'm horrible at remembering names. It's a real Achilles heel of mine, but I can always remember who you barrack for. And it means that I'm no good. I can't live anywhere other than Melbourne because I think it's a skill that's particular to here. So when we talk about the spirit of football, which is the title of this presentation, for me, we're talking about connection. Because at its heart, football or sport is about connection. On field or off, it doesn't work without connection. Good teams aren't made up of 22 or 23 individual sets of skills. They're a combination of sets of skills intersecting personalities, shared purpose. The way in which teammates interact is often as important as the skills they bring. Similarly, off-field, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about one of the 18 teams of the AFL or the countless teams in leagues at every level across the country. Connection is the secret sauce that gets you involved and keeps you there, even when your team is at the wrong end of the ladder or your volunteering shift takes up half your weekend. On any given Saturday or Sunday, or these days Thursday night or Friday night, thousands of Australians are giving up a significant portion of their day to barrack for their club, or volunteer at their club, or in my case, volunteer at their AFL club, or play for their local club, or drive someone to their game, all coming together for a shared purpose when the doing is often more important than the result. I'm the president of an AFL club, so I can't stand here and tell you that results don't matter. Of course they do. But if all we cared about was wins, we'd all barrack for whoever the most moneyed English Premier League soccer team is, and we wouldn't bother about an equalised competition like the AFL or our local clubs. What we care about isn't the winning, it's the journey. We care about the experience. We care about the people we sit near, people we only ever see at the footy. We care about the chats in the office. We care about caring about something that's part of our community that is bigger than us. We care about belonging. I don't have to lecture this room about connection. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Rotarians know better than just about anyone how bringing together people in a local community with a common purpose can quite literally change lives, that a whole lot of little efforts add up into one gargantuan one. I could just as easily be talking about the spirit of Rotary. What makes it work? Connection. And not just that, but focusing on people's assets, what they bring, rather than their deficits, what they lack. At North, connection matters on several different levels. The football connection is obvious, and frankly, as obvious when it doesn't work, like last weekend, as when it does. And I'm not going to talk about it further here. Connection with members is also vital. Members are the lifeblood of your club, and you forget that at your peril. Connecting means listening, not just telling. And for us, connection with our local community through the Huddle, which I know some of you are intimately acquainted with, which is our award-winning community program, and that has quite literally reshaped the way football clubs work in this space. For those who don't know, the Huddle sits on the Arden Street site on the corner of Arden and Fogarty Street and works with young people in and around North Melbourne and now in and around Australia. In fact, this year, the Huddle will work with some 25,000 young people in 240 schools across Australia and partners with 5 additional sporting organisations outside of football, leveraging the power of sport to help young people learn, grow and belong. And if you haven't done it already, you should get Cam McLeod here to talk to you about the extraordinary work that the Huddle does, and particularly the impact it had during Melbourne's lockdown through COVID. So how does being president of a football club relate to being CEO of a national not-for-profit working with migrant women and preschool children? I'll tell you a little bit about community hubs and hopefully that'll become clear. Hubs were invented, or our iteration of them. Everybody calls their thing a hub these days, which is a problem. We should have called ours something else, but we didn't. So it's a hub, and I'm talking about my hubs, not anybody else's hubs. Were invented in the city of Hume, here in Victoria, about 15 years ago. Local school principals were concerned about the increased phenomena of children from non-English speaking backgrounds starting their first day of school having had zero contact with services. No kindergarten, no playgroups, no maternal child health check, no speech checks, no hearing checks, none of the normal stuff that is so essential in the 0 through 4 space, which left prep teachers dealing with a range of problems. At best, a child in a family that didn't understand the learning system, or separation anxiety, or a child not ready to be at school, or undiagnosed speech or hearing or behavioural issues. And in the words of one principal that I work with, one of those in your class is disruptive, but this was half the class or more, and that's the year gone. So the principals started with the council and with the Scanlon Foundation, who still fund the model today, to provide playgroups in schools in an attempt to get children into the school space earlier. And they soon worked out that what they were dealing with wasn't a problem of isolated children, it was a problem of isolated women. And from there, the hub concept was born. And the model's pretty simple. Hubs do 4 things. The first is engagement. They invite people in. And many of the women we see in hubs have never been invited to anything else before. Hubs, at least, are the beginning, often the whole world outside of their family. The second thing hubs do is early childhood, and playgroups are our bread and butter. And we connect children into whatever the early learning is in their area. The third is English language, illiteracy in any language for children, but unashamedly English for women. And I could bore for Australia on this topic, and I won't, but our system is terrific at learning English if you're here to work. If you come here with small children and you're going to parent for 5 years first, forget it. And the number of women I meet who've been here for 20 years or more and still can't speak any English should embarrass us as a country. And the final thing that hubs do is vocational pathways, volunteering, skills training, or connection into jobs. We started with 15 sites in Hume. We've now got 100 schools across Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. Now, hubs are fantastic. They're cost effective. They deliver a staggering return on investment. They have benefits for schools, communities, services and families. And above all, they're sensible. And God knows there's plenty of stuff out there that is not sensible. But I'm running out of time, and today my focus is on connection. So I just want to focus in on that for a minute. I've seen the problem of isolated women replicated in every single community we work in, from Townsville to Playford, and pretty much every migrant group. This is not a refugee issue. The wives of skilled visa holders are some of the most isolated women I've ever met. If any of you live in the city, you may drive in the morning and see women from who are clearly foreign women walking their children to school along City Road, and they'll be going to the new vertical school in South Melbourne. We know that those women are coming out of the flats to take their children to school in the morning, and they're leaving home again to pick them up in the afternoon. And in between the morning and the afternoon, they're at home. They're not doing anything. Often they're skilled, often they've got degrees, and they're not working and they're not part of our community. That's a shame. That's a problem for us. I'll give you some examples of some of the women I've met over the journey. A Burmese woman in one of our Logan hubs who had a difficult child, and so even her local Burmese community wouldn't have her over. She had that kid that nobody wanted in their house. She came to the hub leader got a teacher in to have her to work with the child. Turned out the child was on the autism spectrum and needed specialist help. They helped get the child into a special school. They gave mum some coping strategies, and they provided her with a community and some connections she'd never had. I met a Pakistani woman in one of our Hume hubs who has beautiful English and 3 degrees, including one from a British university, but no idea how to behave in a Western work context, and no idea how to work with men in a workplace because she had never done that before. She just needed to know how to be in one of our environments. A Vietnamese woman in a Brimbank hub who'd worked in Australia for 20 years. She made a fantastic contribution to this country, but she had no language and she'd never learnt English. And she had no one to connect with, and her children had grown up and left home, and she was coming to the hub to learn English because she was so isolated. An Assyrian woman in a Western Sydney hub who'd never learned to write in her first language, and her children gave her a Mother's Day card in her own language because they were learning it at school and she couldn't read it. And an Afghani woman in Dandenong, who's one of the first people I met in this job, who had come to Australia as a refugee. She was diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress and a doctor told her to stay home, and so she did for 7 years. And she sent 2 children to school who'd never spent a day apart from their mother, and turn up at school, you know, and that becomes the school's problem to deal with. By the time she got to the 3rd child, by the time I met her, she was in the hub at Dandenong South Primary School in an English class that was being funded by the Myer Family Foundation. She was no longer eligible for government-funded English, having been in Australia for more than 5 years. And her youngest child had been to playgroup in the hub and was starting school in a much better state than either of his brothers. That stuff is life-changing. Hubs see women that no one else does because they're coming to school for their children, or because their family or friends bring them to the hub, and because they know it's a welcoming, non-judgmental space. And hubs see everyone in terms of their assets. If you've got a skill, the hub leader will find it and she will use it. And let's be honest, that's how we should view these women too, as assets in our community. Perhaps they have a skill or talent we could use, a viewpoint that would enrich our world, a contribution to make, but we'll never know if we don't invite them in and make space for them to join and listen to what they have to say and explore what they can contribute. That's connection. That's what empowers our communities. That's the spirit of football. To me, that's the spirit of community, and that is what builds bridges. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm happy.
Thank you, Sonia. We're out of time. On behalf of the club, we'd like to thank you for your outstanding leadership and the things you do, for pointing out some of the things we can do together, and we wish you very well for the future. So on behalf of us all, could you put your hands together to thank Sonia Hood? Just stay there. Sonia, we have generous gifts for you, which I can't actually see at the moment, but I'll tell you what they are. We present all of our speakers with a pair of Rotary football socks, or if you're a football person, or tennis if you play tennis. But they're manufactured by Philip Endersby down there, who asked the first question. Manufactured in Preston, 200% Australian made. So we have socks for you. We also have a history of the club, and I think we have something else which will be revealed when we find our gift for you. So again, on behalf of us all, please join with me in thanking Sonia Hood. Thank you, Sonia.